My name is Paul Plummer, and I'm here today representing the National Institute for Antimicrobial Resistance Research and Education. And just a little bit of background on me. I'm a producer, dairy and cow-calf operation producer. Was in the barn this morning at 3 o'clock before I got in the car to drive down here from Ames and be back in the barn tonight. But I'm also a veterinarian and teach at the vet school at Iowa State University. I have a microbiology lab where I do research, molecular research on resistance, and now serve as the executive director of NIAA, our new institute. And so I was unable to be here for the last 2 days, but certainly looked at the program, and I've talked to a number of people since I got here, and I think lots of great topics have occurred, and so as we wrap up this afternoon, I think one of the things we want to think about is where do we go next, and how do we continue the conversation that started, and so I want to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing and our new efforts, and encourage you to stay engaged with us and think about what that looks like for you all. And so I wanted to just start with this quote, because I think, and perhaps somebody else showed this weekend, but this was a quote from Alexander Fleming, obviously the individual that discovered penicillin and won the Nobel Prize for it. And before he even won the Nobel Prize, within a couple of days of discovering penicillin, he identified penicillin resistance. So this issue of resistance is not a new issue. This has been around since days after we recognized antibiotics as a useful tool. And so what we have to do is think about every time we go to make those decisions, that needs to be an active process. And we got to think about, are we making those right decisions? How do we make those right decisions? Do we have the science that we need to make those right decisions? And do we have the knowledge, the education, and the resources to help the people making those decisions make those decisions? And so I just wanted to remind us of that as we start into this process. And so with that in mind, I'm going to give you a little bit of quick background on how we came about to be involved in this National Institute. And so back in 2015, a group of us at Iowa State University and in Ames, Iowa, started to recognize through obviously a number of different things, some task force and PACCARB and a number of those things, that AMR was a big issue. I think we probably already knew that, but it was becoming really hitting the world stage. And so we started to build a consortium that over a 3-year period developed initially with a group of us from Iowa State University and the USDA National Animal Health Center and National Animal Disease Center there in Ames, and then it expanded out. Nebraska joined in with us, University of Iowa, Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, USDA both at NADC there in Ames, as well as Meat Animal Research Center, and then a large group of commodity stakeholders, primarily there in the Midwest, but growing nationally. And so our efforts in those early days was to generate evidence-based rationales for antibiotic stewardship. How do we make better decisions day to day in how we use antibiotics? To obviously contribute to the improvements of health with a One Health focus, and that really needed to be not in a silo. We saw too many groups working in silos, either completely focused on animal health or environmental health or particularly human health, and not working together. And use all this information to help develop and facilitate economically and sound social policy development for the Midwest as this regional consortium that we were putting together. And so this is just a quick look of all the different stakeholders we had assembled through that. This is at Iowa State. This was every college on campus with the exception of the College of Design. We couldn't quite figure out how to get them in there, although with these new efforts to print antibiotics and stuff, maybe we can. But so and certainly lots and lots of hours of stakeholder engagement, working with the commodity groups in our state and trying to build our story, and the state public health departments and all of our human counterparts. And so through that process in 2018, we developed this kind of regional consortium. We had over about 150 researchers and extension and education folks all working together to try and improve communication and work together to build what we could do to address this problem. And back in 2015, AAVMC, thank you, Andy, and APLU, so the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges and the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, commissioned a task force to look at what we need to do as a nation to address antibiotic resistance. And one of the outcomes of what would be most transformational was to identify a National Institute of Antimicrobial Resistance Research and Education that would help to try and build those collaborations, improve communication, and get everybody working together for a common goal to make sure that we leveraged what funds we did have coming to agriculture related to AMR and stewardship to leverage those. We were just doing some talking points for a meeting in DC and started adding up appropriations, and you look at the ag appropriations and it's 60-to-1 human to animal, or human to ag in general. But every story you see in the newspaper and every lay press article and every scientific article brings up the ag issue. And so what can we do to leverage those funds that we do get to make sure we maximize our impact? So through a competitive process, the APLU and AAVMC initiated in the spring, we were one of 9 institutions, or 9 teams, I believe, to put in a proposal to host this National Institute. And we were honored and happy to be given that opportunity. And so now, since late July, we've been working to ramp up this regional consortium into a National Institute. And so quick couple of slides here to tell you where we're at and how to become part of that. So you can see our mission here, but our mission is pretty focused to provide local, national, and international leadership in combating antimicrobial resistance. By generating evidence-based solutions, we need evidence, we need data. For antimicrobial stewardship, we have to be good stewards, and contributing to the improvements of health and facilitating sound and socially acceptable policy. So our vision is to drive collaborative and integrative research, education, and engagement to solve AMR challenges and benefit society using a One Health approach. And that truly is, in our hands, an integrative, multidisciplinary event. I think many of y'all saw Michael Dahlstrom spoke a couple of days about science communication. He's part of our team. We're building all of that in that science communication effort. And how do we do a better job of talking about this? The social sciences components, the economics, the ethics. All of those folks are interacting on a daily basis with our researchers and our extension and outreach folks to address these issues. So we don't have time to really go through this. It's complicated. This is our initial starting governance structure. A couple of points I wanted to point out, though, is, and we think this is really key, we're working on these cores. So these, epidemiology, study design, and data analysis. How do we make sure the science that we generate is sound and accurate and not misleading? And study design is a huge component of that, and something very important. The economic and social sciences component, as I mentioned, and then laboratory core and virtual repository. We have tons of labs generating data, really good data, but a lot of it's not comparable because they're using different methods, different systems. Certainly if they're within a surveillance network, they're going to use standardized operating procedures. But outside of those surveillance, even in the large diagnostic labs, Iowa State, we got one of the largest veterinary diagnostic lab. There was one point last year, I'm not saying this to disparage ourselves, it's fixed, but there was one point last year that depending on which lab a sample went into, we got a different MIC because we had an issue in upgrading the computer that didn't have the new data on it. And so we've got to make sure that we are generating comparable data if we want to look across that. So we're building teams with proven expertise. We want to be inclusive. So you notice that aside from that first slide there that had that small base at Iowa State, this doesn't have Iowa State. We want everybody involved. Right now, the money's coming from Iowa State and Nebraska, but our charter is to become self-sustainable, and we want that to be an inclusive brand. And so we're rebranding ourselves not as Iowa State or UNL, but as a national institute that wants all of you to participate, to identify shared solutions and accessible data. How do we deal with some of these issues of confidentiality, intellectual property, and data sharing, and use the data that we can without compromising confidentiality while still maintaining and assuring that we don't have liability and confidentiality issues. So our current themes, we've got 4 large themes. These echo what I believe y'all have probably been talking about. The first one is, how do we use precision agriculture? And that is a big precision agriculture window for us. That's better engineering of facilities. That's genomics for genomic selection. That's using artificial intelligence to identify sick animals earlier. That's identifying alternatives to antimicrobials or pre or probiotics. All of those to us fall into using precision agriculture and various mechanisms to try and address this issue. How do we address the diagnostic issue? Better tests that work in the field that allow professionals on the human and veterinary side and the producers to make better treatment decisions in the field on whether they need to use antibiotics. How do we look at the system, the development of the systems approach? We talk a lot, and there's a lot in the news about, farm to fork, antimicrobial resistance, and we need research to say, is that as big of an issue as some would have you believe, or is it not? But right now, the problem is there's a lot of gaps in there. On either end, the human and the veterinary side, we're using phenotypic MIC testing. The environmental science folks, they're all using genomics and metagenomics. And so how do you interface those? And how do we make sure that we have data that can go all the way through that system? And how do we interpret that, most importantly? And then finally, what's that education and stewardship promotion? How do we train our veterinary students to make better decisions? How do we work with our producers to say, you're doing a great job, but motivate them every day, as was said, to do even better? And that's what we all have to ask ourselves. And so we've just finished setting up our interim advisory committee from outside. So some folks that you might know here, Mike Bohm is one of our leaders from Nebraska. Sarah Nusser's a leader from Iowa State, but Bernadette Dunham from George Washington, formerly at FDA, and Lonnie King. Many of you may know Lonnie King, former dean at Ohio State, and now retired and playing golf. And but the co-chair Pat Card, and then Kathy Wotecki and Robin Patel. That may be a name that's not quite as familiar to you, but she's the incoming president of the American Society for Microbiology and the director of the Mayo Clinical Lab in Rochester that's been part of our team. One of the largest diagnostic human bacteriology labs in the world. And she's become quite engaged and is looking forward to working with us. And so our next steps over the spring, right now we're ramping up our executive advisory committee. We're hiring staff, working on interviews as we speak, and hiring staff. And in the spring of 2019, we're going to be rolling out a large-scale stakeholder membership engagement process. And so we look forward to interacting with you at that time. If you're interested, in the last slide here, we'll have the website, and you can go in to the website and register your interest. But you're here, so you're probably already on our list. But we will be rolling that out. And really, the initial process there is going to be to present probably 2 or 3 potential models of how we make this sustainable and get feedback from you as stakeholders to say what works, what makes this a win-win, and how do we move this forward in a process that makes sense. Take that feedback in, initiate it, and then the whole reason that interim executive advisory committee is interim is because we've told them 9 months from now we want to have some of you being on that executive advisory. So it's a shared governance system that we're seeking them for their initial input, and then we want this to really be an entity that engages all of you. So we're very active in governmental affairs. We already are doing twice monthly government affairs phone calls with a variety of government affair folks that are already part of our regional and the APL-UA VMC, developing lots of talk points. I believe we've got representatives tomorrow at SFAR with priority setting, and so that's part of it, the communications and developing a concerted effort. So with that, here's my contact information. Like I said, if you're interested, if you go to this website, right now it's an Iowa State website, but it soon will be changing. But if you go there, it will have a place where you can register your interest, and we will definitely be in touch as soon as we start that process.